Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Shark Talk, where I sit down and have a good old chat with Chris Fallows. Now, you may recognise Chris from Shark Week. He is a world-renowned wildlife photographer and an authority on great white sharks. He was also heavily involved with the discovery of their breaching behaviour at Seal Island in False Bay. So I chat with him about this discovery, about the current situation in South African waters, and we have a chat as well about his incredible experiences working with great white sharks. So take a look and enjoy. Chris, welcome to Shark Talk, and thank you so much for giving up some of your time to chat with me. We've got a lot to discuss.
Thanks for having me, Gemma. It's always nice to talk to another person who's passionate about sharks, and really look forward to hearing your questions.
The beady-eyed of our viewers will have noticed that I've got your book just behind me. And in the beginning of that book, it says that you want to inspire young people to show that they can achieve things, they can follow their dreams, and they can achieve what they want to achieve as long as they have conviction in their hearts. And that brings us into your discovery of the great white behaviour at False Bay, Seal Island.
Like most young boys and girls out there, you know, sharks and dinosaurs and all those big, sexy creatures are pretty fascinating. And it was no different for me. I was fascinated by sharks, and living in Cape Town, you know, False Bay had a rich history. It was called the Great White Breeding Ground, although that was a bit of a misnomer. But one of the most famous great white sharks of all time, called the submarine, was a shark that was very familiar to, you know, fishermen in False Bay at the time. And so I was fascinated by those animals. And when I left school, I started a conservation program with local fishermen that used to row little purse-seine boats out from the shore and set a net in a semicircle, pull it to shore, and their target catch was a variety of different bony fish. But as a bycatch, they caught a lot of sharks. And sadly at the time, because of the bathers on the beaches of Muizenberg and other areas along the False Bay coastline, the bathers told the fishermen they must kill the sharks because the sharks posed this huge threat to people. Anyhow, to cut a long story short, I convinced the fishermen, you know, let's give these animals a chance and allow me to tag them. And so they did. And we started a tagging program together with these fishermen in 1989, which ran up until just a couple of years ago. And I was incredibly lucky to work with them, an amazing group of people that I learned a huge amount of about the ocean from. And we tagged over 5,000 different sharks and rays and released probably well in excess of 10,000 animals altogether. So it was a great introduction to me of the different shark species along our coastline. It was very tactile in that I was touching these animals, helping them back into the water. It had a huge educational component because literally on weekends or public holidays or school holidays, you'd sometimes get thousands of people watching these nets being pulled in. And here, instead of seeing these sharks being killed, they saw them being pulled out the nets, they saw research being done on them, and they saw them being released. And in 1991, the fishermen caught a small little great white shark in their nets. And I took this little great white out. I still remember it very clearly because it's the smallest great white I'd ever seen. And I was able to actually cradle it in my arms. It was just over 1.5 meters in length. And I tagged this animal, and I took the information to the only group working on great white sharks at the time, which was the White Shark Research Institute led by Theo and Craig Ferreira. And they obviously saw here was a crazy keen young shark guy, and they offered me a volunteer position, which I eagerly took up, and I worked as a volunteer for them in those days at Struisbaai and Dyer Island of Gansbaai for 4 wonderful years. All at the same time, I was very curious what was going on in our own backyard, which was at Seal Island in False Bay, which is not more than about 12 kilometers from where I live. And in the early 90s, a friend, Rob Lawrence, who became well known for another shark business in False Bay, he and I headed out in my 3.5 meter long rubber duck, a little inflatable boat, which is not recommended for looking at great white sharks with. And I towed a little yellow life jacket behind the boat because I'd seen work being done by Scott Anderson in the Farallon Islands, where he threw a surfboard off the rocks and got a shark to breach. So I thought, well, let me pull something behind and see if there's any reaction. And yeah, to be honest, I wasn't really expecting anything. And within 30 seconds of putting this out, a tiny great white shark, probably also 2.5 meters in length, came flying out the water. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, we all just Rob, myself, and two friends, we looked at each other completely astonished. The other two friends were 100% keen to go back to the shore. And I was like, no ways, we're trying this again. And we pulled the little life jacket in because the shark spat it out, tied it off again, expecting, well, maybe this was just a crazy once-off and a fluke. And we towed it now instead of, for a short period of time, probably for about 10, 15 minutes. And then it's the only time I can ever use the Jaws expression of the shark was bigger than the boat because it was a small boat. But about a 3.5 to 3.8 meter great white came flying out the water and then spat the life jacket out and came and inspected our boat. And by that stage, our other two friends were completely petrified and almost hysterical about wanting to go back to shore. So I knew I couldn't try a third time. But it was obviously very apparent to us we had discovered something pretty unique. By that stage, Rob was delivering pizzas and he made a little bit of money, and I was getting up early in the morning and picking up shells off the beach and collecting fossil shark teeth to generate a bit of income. And we bought a small boat about 18 foot in length, and we started going out to Seal Island, and we had a cage made. It was a truly horrible cage. I don't think it would have kept a budgie inside it, but anyhow, we had this horrible cage made. And we headed out there, and the cage used to be wrapped in tarpaulin, and we used to tell people who asked us what was under the tarpaulin, we used to say it was a giant lobster trap, and we came up with all sorts of crazy things. And anyhow, one of the guys that came out with us had a video camera, and he shot a bit of footage of a breach. And I still don't know exactly how it got back to National Geographic, but suddenly National Geographic were knocking on our doors, and the first major shoot we did at the island was with Rodney Fox, who's probably the most famous shark attack victim in the world, David Dubélé, one of the world's best underwater photographers, and then Peter Benchley, obviously the most famous author of shark-related novels with Jaws. So they came out, and I remember they were incredibly skeptical of the fact that great white sharks flew through the air. And in the 2 or 3 days we had with them, I think we saw 13 or 15 breaches, and suddenly the word was out. And the moment that documentary aired, the phone rang off the hook. I, by that stage, started taking photography pretty seriously and had a couple of photographs published, which it was crazy. I mean, living in South Africa in those days, email was relatively new. We were still using fax machines. So the fax used to ring off the hook. You'd have that crazy beeping sound in the middle of the night when people were calling from Australia or the US and completely different time zones. And it was surreal.
There's so much that I love about that story, and it's just the fact that you discovered something. It was in the 90s. It's not actually that long ago, and you discovered this huge specialist, you say, behaviour. And not only that, but you were very much into sharks, but you didn't have a marine biology degree, or you weren't, an esteemed conservationist, or you were a young, enthusiastic person just going out there and seeing what you could discover. And I think that is so inspiring because, and actually I've spoken about this with Madison Stewart in a previous episode, saying that we need to be careful with the term conservationist, or, the way that we revere certain individuals, because we don't want to alienate people from conservation issues or from feeling that they can't go out there and be involved in these things if they don't have a certain degree or a certain qualification. And I just think your story is testament to that you saw an opportunity, you saw something of interest and you went after it, and then look what's followed. So you made this amazing discovery, and then the shark, cage diving, ecotourism, everything followed in False Bay around Seal Island. And it became a great success story, and it also furthered people's interest in sharks and helped people engage, and it educated people, and it did great things. Now, there is a crisis going on in South African waters. I think it's very fair to call it that. So I think if we start by just giving a summary as to what is happening, and then we'll go from there.
Over the last 25 years, we've collected more than 10,000 predatory events at Seal Island, which represents by far and away the largest database of its kind when you look at natural predatory behaviour. And we obviously became very familiar with the sharks in the area, the strategies they used to hunt, the seasonality behind the animals, and very importantly, where to look for them at specific times of the year. So in the winter months, we knew to find the great white sharks at Seal Island, and that was the same at Dyer Island or Seal Island in Mossel Bay. That's where the great whites were in the winter months. In the summer months, we very quickly learned to look for them at certain locations inshore that had high densities of smaller shark species. So species such as smooth hound sharks and soupfin sharks and bronze whaler sharks, wherever there were high densities of those smaller shark species, that's where we would find the great whites. And it was a pattern that repeated itself year in, year out. The moment the southeaster started blowing, usually around about September every year, we would leave Seal Island, we'd move inshore, and that the great whites would be there when those other species of sharks would return to the bay. And that pattern continued up until around about 2012, 2014, we started seeing a decline, a noticeable decline. And then that decline really started kicking in just after 2014. 2015, a really significant drop off, and then by 2018, pretty much no more great white sharks at all. And at around about the same time, around about 2015 or so, you started hearing more and more stories of the demersal shark longliners really getting stuck into the smaller shark species along the South African coastline. They had very effectively learned where and when to target these smaller shark species. Their catches soared, and the white sharks simply disappeared from those inshore areas where we historically found them. When we started going looking at those inshore areas, we also noticed those smaller shark species were completely gone. In 2009, and this is the other side of the story, in 2009 we had the first orcas that we had ever seen in False Bay. From 1996, when we started in False Bay, up until 2009, we'd never seen orcas. But in 2009, we suddenly, orcas arrived, and they started becoming a regular fixture in the bay. In 2017, obviously, in the Gansbaai area, two orcas known as Port and Starboard came into that area, and they certainly would, for lack of any other better evidence, be seen as the culprits in killing a couple of great white sharks. So unfortunately, it was a double whammy for the great whites. So we have been very, very vehemently fighting the demersal shark longlining in South Africa. They're targeting two species, the smooth hound shark and the soupfin shark. The soupfin shark is a critically endangered animal. The Department of Environmental Affairs' own data has shown how depleted the species is. It's 90% overfished. Data from all around the world is saying that this animal is racing towards extinction. So, yeah, unless that changes, unless the world takes offense to what's going on in South Africa, sadly, the South African coastline is being laid to the sword. And the sad thing about it is that these sharks are being caught for fish and chips for Australia. So, affluent Australians who are probably able to eat a whole variety of different other things are consuming South Africa's sharks, and it's leading to massive changes along our coastline.
It makes sense that you're incredibly passionate, and I just want to give you an opportunity to give a bit of a call to arms, really.
Thank you, Gemma. Yeah, I think firstly, if you're Australian, please stop eating South African sharks. You're having a huge impact on our coastline, and I think for future generations of South Africans, if you don't stop, there's going to be nothing left for people to enjoy and have a future with you. I think globally, we've got a website going called sharkfreechips.com that explains the situation very, very clearly. It highlights the facts, and it also showcases exactly what's going on from a mismanagement point of view. It shows exactly what's going on from an illegal capture of protected species, fishing in marine protected areas, and all the shortcomings of this fishery. So please have a look at that. Empower yourself with knowledge so that you're very familiar on the entire problem. And then, I think it's a case of we can all make a difference in our own particular environments in terms of the choices we make. I know sharks are being sold as fish and chips, not just in Australia, but really look for sustainable choices. And I think, we also need to develop a compassionate side of things. We don't need to look at animals based on their pound and flesh value. We need to look at animals as being a very integral part of our world and how they add to that world by just their mere presence. And put pressure on the people making decisions now. Write letters to them. Get petitions going. Passionately fight for what's left, because if you don't, nobody's going to.
Yes, very, very well said. And talking of empowering yourself, picking up on that last point you said as well, get out there, get petitions going, take people to task. You can do that. It doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, where you're from. Put yourself out there and make yourself heard, and it can easily be done, It's just persistence. And we're going to move on now to a bit more of your life experiences. I mean, the stories that you can tell, I could talk to you for a very long time and ask you many, many questions. But I'm going to start off with just a bit of a philosophical one, really. You've spent many, many years with great white sharks, diving with them, photographing them, working with them. And I just want to know, what can we learn from sharks? And you can take that question however you wish.
There are two things that immediately come to mind. The first is that great white sharks are vulnerable animals. They have very strong personalities. Just like if you had to put 20 people in a room, you'd get the shy person who sits in the corner, the loud mouth, the really curious one. And the great whites are exactly the same. And for me, that was one of the highlights in working with these animals for 30 odd years, was getting to know individual animals, watch them grow from a young adolescent shark up to a full strapping adult, and watch those personalities bloom and blossom, and really enjoy all the bouquet of differences that I was exposed to on a daily basis. So it really made me fall in love with those animals, and it was so exciting when every year my favorite sharks would come back, and by the same token, every year when certain sharks didn't come back, it was very difficult. And then the other thing I learned is that the great white shark is not a wanton killer. It kills for a purpose and a reason, and nothing goes to waste. And I have to say that I've lived a pretty crazy life. I've done a lot of things people haven't had the privileges that I've had, and I've been exposed to a lot of dangerous predators, supposedly dangerous predators around the world. And if I had to be killed by any of them, I'd have to say a great white shark is a great way to go, because you know exactly what you're getting. If it's going to attack you, if you're a seal, it's going to bite you in half and quickly consume you, and that's the game over. Whereas an animal like an orca might play with its food, or a cheetah might let you go if you're a young gazelle and catch you again. A great white shark is an animal that hunts purely on instinct and does what it does because that's what it's been programmed to do. And for the most part, they're simply not interested in us. I've gone to great lengths through my photography and through the documentaries to get very close to these animals. And I can tell you on more occasions than not, they've wanted to have nothing to do with me. And sometimes I almost feel it's a bit of an offense. Do I really look or taste that bad that you don't want to come closer? But, they're just about doing what they've evolutionarily become accustomed to do. And that's how those animals work. So a great white shark for me is what you see is what you get. And I love that honesty about working with them. I think that's fantastic. And then finally, another thing that for me has been a real eye-opener is that I so tremendously respect both predator and prey. Having watched all those interactions between both, it's a life and death battle. And so many times over the years that I have people screaming, kill the seal, and I was like, that animal's fighting for its life. It's going through tremendous fear, tremendous stress. And I would put myself in that animal's position, and you'd think after seeing 10,000 odd predatory events, you would become hardened to it. But I never did. In fact, I probably became softer over age, and I respected if the great white shark doesn't catch the seal, it starves to death. And if the seal doesn't get away, obviously it dies. And, the great whites could make many mistakes, but the seal could only make one. And for me, that amazing balance, that dance, that pas de deux of death, that I witnessed so often was just the most incredibly humbling and drama filled experience every single time. And I so respect both predator and prey.
And actually, the moment when I sort of had that feeling as well was when we were watching a couple of seals coming back to the island, and when they got to a certain distance, you could hear them take a really deep breath. You could hear that inhale, and then they were gone. And you knew that they had to take a deep breath, get down to the ocean floor, and swim along that ocean floor to get back to the island. And it was that moment of thinking they know what they've got to do and they're fully aware of the situation. I believe, coming back to the island, they've got to get down and they've got to, avoid being a vulnerable silhouette on the surface. And it just, hearing that inhale was the moment for me when I kind of, all of that came together and I saw it from both sides.
When we worked with the seals, we were very cautious of not engaging our engines and not potentially doing anything that might jeopardize those animals, because the balance was so incredibly fine. And to see fear in an animal's eyes is never something I enjoy, but it really drove home the fact of just the tremendous pressure they were under.
One thing that is incredible about your work is actually not just the photography itself and the amazing images that you capture, but it's and the stories that those images tell, but it's the written words that go with it. In the book behind me, particularly, the way you describe things is it sets the scene, and you could be there. You really could. Do you have a favourite image of a great white shark that you've taken, or maybe two favourite images? And could you tell us a little bit of the story behind them? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit there. I'm well aware.
You are indeed putting me on the spot. Firstly, thank you very much for those kind words. I don't see myself as any more talented photographer than anybody else. I just see myself as a person who's had unbelievable exposure and opportunity to take, I guess, impactful images. So if I had to pick a image, maybe the image directly behind me, that one over there, because that photograph was probably 30 years in the making. As a photographer, you go through various different stages in your life, from when you first pick up a camera and you get a chunk of a dorsal fin or a splash and it's fantastic, to then you start looking at portraits, to trying to get open mouth shots, to then trying to get a breech shot, to then trying to get a low angle breech shot, to then starting to bring in backgrounds, to then trying to get a low angle wide, a low angle and wide angle breech shot with the perfect atmosphere in the background and all sorts of elements. And that shot behind me was kind of one of those, an incredible breech shot from no more than about 5 or 6 feet away, with a moody sky. So yeah, a huge amount of elements. So from a technical point of view, that shot in particular was a good one. And then I suppose from a photographic point of view, the shot I took in 2001, which was called Air Jaws. It's of a great white coming flying out with its mouth open.
I knew that would be in there. I knew it had to be in there.
that photograph really put me on the map as a wildlife photographer, and that photo was all around the world. And so I'm very grateful for that photo, because it opened a lot of doors for me, and it really allowed me to see a lot of places around the world and gave me a platform to talk about the great white sharks.
Now, I'm aware that time is getting away, and I've got a few questions. A lot of people wrote in for questions for you, but most of them were focused on what we've discussed, which is the orca situation and the overfishing and things like that. So some of it will have been covered. The first question from Rob Barber. He says he's a massive fan of you, and your absolutely bonkers photography on breaching white sharks out in South Africa's Seal Island. So he'd like to ask the question if the white sharks are back at Seal Island and breaching, because on the last programme that he watched, you were using drones to find where the sharks were hunting and their different tactics and locations.
Yeah, so firstly, it's great to know that you are a fan of my work, and thank you for that. It's always very humbling to have people enjoy my work. So with regards to the breaching great white sharks, our company Apex works in a whole lot of different locations in South Africa, and we try and work wherever we're getting the best activity for our guests. So there are a couple of locations. You've got Mossel Bay further up the coast where they've got great white sharks, Algoa Bay in Port Elizabeth, Plettenberg Bay where there are a couple of great whites. So depending on the season, we choose to work at a whole host of different venues. At Seal Island in False Bay and in False Bay itself, we're still working with seven gill sharks. We've got a few bronze whalers. We work offshore with mako and blue sharks. So there are a tremendous amount of opportunities for anyone who's still interested in sharks. But for breaching great whites, it really depends on season. And if you want to get hold of me at any time of the year, I can tell you where we're getting our best results. It'll be an absolute pleasure.
Next question from Alistair White. So he says obviously he's aware of the disappearance and the decline of great whites around False Bay, but he wants to know, where have they gone to? Where do you think they are?
I honestly don't know. There was a supposed eastward shift in South Africa, and I worked very closely with Dr. Enrico Gennari based in Mossel Bay, and he's been the prominent shark scientist there for nearly 2 decades. We've also got currently for the last 2 years, we've had a research project going at Plettenberg Bay, which is the next great white shark location going east of that. And then we're in contact with the ecotourism operator at Algoa Bay, which is the next major aggregation site east of that. So those are the 3 points that, if there was an eastward explosion of animals, that would account for the disappearance of arguably the world's 2 biggest populations, Seal Island and Gansbaai, you would expect an explosion of numbers in those areas, and we certainly are not seeing them. Enrico's not seeing it. Their numbers have remained relatively constant, although they're starting to see strange gaps like we did in False Bay before the collapse. So where those big sharks have gone and where the white sharks that were at Seal Island and Gansbaai have gone, I don't know. I like to, perhaps it's an optimist in me, believe that they found a happy hunting ground somewhere else and one day they'll return to Seal Island. But I honestly can't tell you. There's no real explanation of where these animals have suddenly ended up. Certainly not in South Africa.
I think this next question, it would be very interesting to get your response. So at the time of recording, we're still in the midst of a pandemic. Here in the UK, we're locked down, and I know around the world, everyone's feeling very restricted, quite claustrophobic, and having huge limits put on what they can do at the moment. So as someone who's used to, a roller coaster lifestyle, have you got any tips for people how to deal with this feeling of feeling limited, claustrophobic, trying to get their hit of nature and of adventure in these times?
Yeah, Gemma, it's a very tough time, make no mistake, and especially for elderly people who, are really confined. I think there's so much around us just on our doorsteps that we can enjoy. Both from a natural history point of view and a photographic point of view, I've learned to not look at just a single species, but look at an entire ecosystem or an entire picture. I'm a person who tries to wake up and see every single sunrise, and I try and get the most out of looking at clouds and understanding what they mean, looking at weather, and the different vagaries associated with that, from little puffs of cloud on a mountain that might mean something to how different changes take place in our garden based on weather. And I think, if we pay more attention to our surroundings and really live in the moment, there is so much going on around each and every one of us, whether you live in a game reserve or you live in an apartment block. There are little changes in the ecosystems that we can all enjoy, from going for a walk in a garden on your doorstep and looking at how the insects, utilize different plants, how the birds in turn focus on those insects. And you'll probably be amazed if you watch simple little things like sparrows, how it's the same individual birds coming back to your garden every single day. They've got their own routes and routines. And it's fascinating if you start paying attention to the small things around you, that in turn will give you a greater appreciation of the whole ecosystem. And I think once lockdown, eventually and hopefully comes to an end, by focusing on the small things around you, you'll probably get a greater understanding of the bigger picture and probably enjoy your time when you can start chasing horizons that much more, because you really would have focused on the small things and probably have a better understanding of what's going on outside of your small environment. So make the most of what's around you now, and bigger things are out there waiting for all of us.
Thank you so much for talking to me today. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And I look forward to catching up with you again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you, Gemma. And yeah, to all people out there who'd love to hear more about what we're doing, Gemma will put the social media tags up. If you want a bit of advice about any form of wildlife in Southern Africa and I can help in any way, please feel free to ask. And the same from a photographic point of view. I know there are many young aspiring photographers out there that might not know the ins and outs of how to make a career out of photography. Please, I can give you the advice for what it's worth. And yeah, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my passion. What a great privilege. So thank you very much, Gemma.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye.